The humans would all die screaming in unimaginable agony as the Klingons tortured them one by one if Captain Jerry Baker failed in his desperate defense of the colony planet New Terra against Commander Lennox's mighty invasion fleet. When war erupted between the alien Klingon Empire and United Earth Federation, the advanced warships of the powerful Klingon Armada cut a swath of destruction through human space. The Klingons invaded with confidence, assured their superior technology would bring the human worlds to their knees in a matter of days. Lennox, hardened veteran of 100 campaigns and decorated battlecruiser commander, led the spearhead of the attack straight for the human colony of New Terra. As his flotilla of heavily armed vessels entered orbit and powered up planet's scorching beam cannons, a lone human frigate burned out of space dock to meet them head-on. An outdated, lightly armored corvette class, the UEFS Intrepid looked like a minnow, facing down a pod of orcas as it screamed toward the bristling Klingon formation on full afterburn. At the helm, Captain Jerry Baker gripped the stick in white-knuckled fists, his face grim as he watched the sensor feed light up with inbound missile locks. This was it, the moment of truth. 3 million innocent souls huddled in bunkers on the planet below, praying he could pull off a miracle. Men, women, children, their lives hung in the balance. Every human on New Terra would perish in radioactive fire if Baker couldn't find a way to stop the Klingons here and now. The Intrepid shuddered as the first salvo of Klingon anti-ship missiles slammed into her kinetic barriers. Alarms wailed and damage reports flooded in. Baker tuned it out, his focus absolute, his mind already racing through audacious tactics that just might let him cripple Lennox's dreadnought and send the Klingon running. No matter the odds, no matter the cost, Baker would make these alien bastards bleed for every inch of human soil. He swore it on the blood of his ancestors, on the lives of his crew and everyone counting on him. One way or another, the Klingons would learn the folly of underestimating human resolve. They would learn to fear all that dared threaten humanity's worlds and freedom. They would learn to fear all that dared threaten humanity's worlds and freedom. But that lesson would have to wait. For now, there was a more pressing matter at hand. In the aftermath of the stunning defeat inflicted upon Lennox's forces at New Terra, the Klingon High Command dispatched a delegation to negotiate for the return of their captured commander. Captain Jerry Baker, the hero of the hour and the man who had orchestrated the improbable victory, met with the Klingon representatives aboard his ship, the Intrepid. The lead Klingon negotiator, a stern-faced alien introduced as Ambassador Crone, wasted no time in getting to the point. He demanded the immediate release of Lennox into their custody, hinting none too subtly at dire consequences for the humans should they refuse. Baker listened impassively, his expression betraying nothing. When Crone finished his ultimatum, Baker leaned forward. "I understand your position, Ambassador, and I am prepared to return Commander Lennox to you, but I have certain conditions that must be met first." Crone's eyes narrowed. "Conditions? You dare make demands of us? After your cowardly capture of our commander? I warn you, human, you tread on dangerous ground." Baker remained unfazed. "I propose an exchange of information, Ambassador. You provide us with detailed intelligence on your weapon systems, ship schematics, and military tactics. In return, we release Lennox back to you unharmed." The Klingon sputtered incredulously. "You cannot seriously expect us to divulge our most sensitive military secrets to you. The arrogance!" "I don't expect you to just hand them over, no," Baker replied coolly. "But you should know that we've already begun interrogating Lennox. He's proven quite forthcoming with useful intelligence, so you can either cooperate with my terms or we'll simply extract what we need from him directly. The choice is yours." Crone glared daggers at Baker, trembling with barely suppressed rage. But faced with the unthinkable prospect of the humans gaining access to their most guarded information, he had little choice. "Very well, Captain," Crone growled through clenched teeth. "We will comply with your demands. But the Klingon Empire does not forget such insults. There will be a reckoning for this, I promise you." Over the next several days, Baker and the Klingon delegation engaged in tense negotiations, with the aliens gradually divulging critical data on their ships, weapons, and battle strategies. Baker and his team pored over the information, searching for exploitable weaknesses and vulnerabilities. As this was happening, Baker also took the time to speak with Linux, who was being held in comfortable but secure quarters aboard the Intrepid. To his surprise, the captive Klingon commander seemed to have developed a certain respect for his human adversaries. Linux probed Baker with questions about Earth's history and the nature of the human spirit that allowed them to overcome such overwhelming odds. Baker answered as best he could, recounting the many trials and challenges humans had faced throughout the centuries. The wars, the disasters, the seemingly insurmountable obstacles, and the unstoppable drive to persevere and emerge stronger for them. Linux listened intently, a grudging admiration growing behind his stony exterior. When the time finally came for him to be turned back over to Crone and the Klingon delegation, he gripped Baker's arm in a warrior's salute. "You humans are unlike any foe we have ever faced," Linux remarked. "This war is a long way to go, but know that you have earned the respect of Linux, son of Morath." With Linux securely back in Klingon hands, Baker watched the alien ships depart, firing off a salvo of warning shots as they accelerated away. He felt a grim resolution settle over him. The Klingons now knew what the humans were capable of, and more importantly, the humans now had a far greater understanding of their enemy. The tide was about to turn in this war. Armed with new knowledge and an unwavering drive, Baker and his crew set about laying plans to take the fight to the Klingons. Engineers and scientists worked around the clock to incorporate the intelligence gleaned from the negotiations, reverse engineering captured tech to bolster humanity's arsenal. The path ahead would be long and bloody, as the Klingons fought back with all the ferocity of a wounded but still lethal predator. But Baker had a feeling that his people's chances had just gotten a whole lot better. Fate had given them a chance here, by delivering Linux into their hands, and putting Baker in the right place at the right time to secure those precious scraps of intel on their foes. Now it was up to humanity to seize that chance, to show the Klingons and any others out there that it would take far more than this to extinguish the human spirit. And if the Klingons failed to grasp that lesson this time, well, Baker would be more than happy to teach it to them again, as many times as it took. The war machine of the Klingon Empire shuddered under the relentless assault of Captain Jerry Baker and his fleet. The UEFS Intrepid, now outfitted with reverse-engineered Klingon tech, led a series of lightning raids deep into enemy territory. Plasma cannons flashed and hull plating buckled as Baker's ships struck at shipyards, weapons depots, and command centers. "Target their fuel reserves," Baker ordered, his voice steady as the bridge rocked from return fire. "Let's see how far their battle cruisers get on empty tanks." The Intrepid's newly upgraded phasers lanced out, punching through Klingon shields and igniting massive explosions. As Baker watched the destruction unfold on the monitor, he couldn't help but reflect on how quickly the tables had turned. Meanwhile, on the Klingon homeworld of Kyonos, Linux stood before the High Council, his head held high despite the hostile glares boring into him. "You dare show your face here after what you've done?" growled Korvac, a hulking warrior with a scar bisecting his face. "You have brought shame upon the Empire." Linux met Korvac's gaze unflinchingly. "I brought wisdom if only you'd listen. The humans are not to be underestimated. We must adapt or we will fall." Murmurs of outrage rippled through the chamber. The head of the council, Kumpek, raised a hand for silence. "Enough. Linux, son of Morath, you are hereby stripped of your rank and command. Be grateful we do not execute you for treason." Linux clenched his fists but said nothing as guards escorted him from the chamber. In the days that followed, he sought out others who shared his views, warriors who had faced humans in battle and recognized the threat they posed. In secret meetings held in shadowy corners of the capital city, Linux gathered his allies. "The High Council is blind," he told them, "but we will not be. We will study the humans, learn their ways, and forge new strategies to counter them." As Linux's clandestine group took shape, Baker's raids continued to wreak havoc across Klingon space. The High Command grew increasingly desperate, their usual tactics failing in the face of human ingenuity. In a secure lab deep beneath the surface of Kronos, Dr. Korg hunched over an array of blinking consoles. The air hummed with the sound of containment fields as he manipulated strands of engineered DNA. "Yes," he muttered, eyes gleaming with a fervent light. "The virus is nearly complete. Soon, the human plague will be wiped from the galaxy." As both sides raced toward their objectives, one seeking victory through military might, the other through biological warfare, the seeds of an unlikely alliance were sown. The fate of two civilizations hung in the balance, with the actions of a few key individuals poised to tip the scales. The fragile peace that Baker and Lennox had fought so hard to achieve began crumbling almost immediately. On Kronos, the Klingon homeworld, shouts echoed through the halls of the High Council chamber. "Traitors!" bellowed Korvac, hitting his fist on the table. "Baker and Lennox have spit on our honor. They must pay with their lives." Murmurs of agreement rippled through the assembled Klingon leaders, but not all were convinced. Kompek, his weathered face creased with concern, raised a hand for silence. "We cannot ignore the facts," he said gravely. "Our forces have suffered heavy losses. Continuing this war may lead to our downfall." As debates raged on Kronos, Baker and Lennox found themselves on the run. They huddled in the dimly lit hold of a rickety freighter, surrounded by a small group of loyal human and Klingon followers. "We need to move fast," Baker said, studying a star chart. "The hardliners will be hunting us." Lennox nodded grimly. "My contacts say there's a bounty on our heads. We're not safe anywhere in Klingon space." On Earth, scientists worked feverishly in sterile labs, racing to develop a vaccine against the Klingon bioweapon. Dr. Sarah Chen peered into a microscope, dark circles under her eyes betraying countless sleepless nights. "We're close," she muttered. "But will it be enough? Will it be in time?" Emboldened by the chaos engulfing the Klingon Empire, Earth's military leaders saw an opportunity. Admiral Zhao laid out a daring plan to Baker via encrypted channel. "We're going after their shipyards," Zhao explained. "With their leadership in disarray, now's our chance to cripple their war machine." Baker's team moved swiftly, slipping past Klingon patrols and a captured bird of prey. They docked at a massive orbital facility, the skeleton of a new battlecruiser looming before them. "Plant the charges here, here, and here," Baker instructed, indicating key structural points. "We'll bring this whole operation crashing down." The mission was a resounding success. As Baker's team made their escape, explosions rocked the shipyard. Klingon vessels under construction broke apart, tumbling into the void. News of the brazen attack sent shockwaves through the Klingon Empire. On Kronos, the hardliners seized their chance. "No more talk," roared General Krug, storming into the High Council chamber with armed troops at his back. "The humans have gone too far. We will crush them, starting with their colony on Vega Prime." A massive Klingon fleet assembled, warships stretching as far as the eye could see. But Baker and Lennox had no intention of letting Vega Prime fall without a fight. "We can't match them ship for ship," Lennox said as they approached the beleaguered colony. "But we know their tactics, their weaknesses. We'll make them bleed for every inch." The battle for Vega Prime raged for days. Baker and Lennox led hit-and-run attacks, striking from hidden asteroid bases and vanishing before the Klingons could respond. They lured enemy ships into tight formations, then hammered them with salvaged Klingon weaponry. In the end, it was too much for even the mighty Klingon armada. Their fleet in tatters, they were forced to retreat in disgrace. Word of the unlikely victory spread like wildfire. Humans and Klingons alike flocked to Baker and Lennox's banner, seeing hope for a lasting peace. But in the shadows, a far greater threat was taking shape. On Kronos, in a secret laboratory, Klingon scientists worked to weaponize the deadly virus. General Krug loomed over them, his eyes gleaming with malice. "The humans think they've won," he snarled, "but soon we'll wipe their pitiful species from the face of the galaxy." As whispers of the bioweapon plot reached Baker and Lennox, they knew time was running out. The fate of two civilizations now rested in their hands. "We've got one shot at this," Baker said grimly, addressing their growing band of allies. "If we fail, everything we fought for dies with us." Lennox nodded, a fierce light in his eyes. "Then we won't fail. For the sake of both our peoples, we'll end this madness once and for all." With steely willpower, they began planning their final audacious attempt. The clock was ticking, and the future of the galaxy hung in the balance. Captain Jerry Baker crouched behind a twisted metal barrier, his breath coming in short gasps. Beside him, Lennox's eyes gleamed with fierce perseverance. The air reeked of ozone and scorched metal as disruptor fire screamed overhead. "We need to move now," Baker shouted over the din of battle. "The bioweapon stockpile won't secure itself." Lennox nodded, hefting his captured Klingon disruptor rifle. "I'll take point. Watch my back, human." They sprinted from cover, dodging energy blasts that left smoking craters in the deck plating. Baker's strike team, a mix of hardened human commandos and Klingon rebels, fanned out behind them, laying down suppressing fire. As they neared the facility's main entrance, a hulking figure stepped into view. General Krath, his face twisted in a snarl of hatred, leveled a massive disruptor cannon at the intruders. "You dare violate this sacred place," Krath roared. "The virus will cleanse the galaxy of your taint." Baker dove for cover as Krath opened fire, the cannon's blast vaporizing a nearby console. Lennox rolled to his feet, squeezing off several quick shots that forced Krath back. "Go!" Lennox shouted to Baker. "Find the stockpile. I'll handle this, Ptak." Baker nodded grimly and motioned for half the team to follow him. They raced deeper into the facility, dispatching Krath's loyalists with precision. In the command center, Baker's fingers flew over alien controls. "There," he muttered. "Containment level, 3 decks down." As Baker's team secured the virus, alarms blared throughout the complex. Red emergency lighting bathed everything in an eerie glow. "Self-destruct initiated," an emotionless computer voice announced. "Facility detonation in 5 minutes. Baker cursed, activating his comm unit. "Lennox, we've got the stockpile, but this place is about to blow." Static crackled, then Lennox's voice came through. "Krath activated the self-destruct. Get to the control room on level 2. I'll meet you there." Baker and his team fought their way through waves of desperate Klingon defenders. They reached the control room with less than 3 minutes to spare. Lennox limped in moments later, blood seeping from a wound in his side. "Can you stop it?" Lennox asked, leaning heavily against a console. Baker's hands flew over the alien interface. "Maybe, but I need time." Disruptor fire erupted from the corridor. Lennox gritted his teeth and took up a firing position by the door. "You'll have it, my friend." As Baker worked frantically to disable the self-destruct, Lennox held off Krath's remaining forces, the room filled with acrid smoke and the stench of burned flesh. 30 seconds, Baker shouted. Lennox grunted in acknowledgement, his disruptor glowing red-hot from constant use. With seconds to spare, Baker cracked the final encryption. The alarms fell silent, and the computer announced, "Self-destruct sequence aborted." Baker sagged in relief, then noticed Lennox slumped against the wall, his chest a mass of burns. "We did it," Lennox wheezed. "We saved them both, human and Klingon." Baker clasped his ally's arm. "We're not done yet. Hold on, you stubborn Klingon." The facility rocked as Chancellor Martok's loyalist forces arrived, mopping up the last pockets of resistance. Medics rushed to treat the wounded heroes as Baker recounted their success to Martok via comlink. In the days that followed, news of Baker and Lennox's incredible feat spread across both empires. The tide of war had turned, not through strength of arms, but through the courage of those who dared to see beyond ancient hatreds. The dust settled on Kyonos, revealing a landscape forever changed. Captain Jerry Baker surveyed the bombed-out streets of the Klingon capital, his eyes taking in the destruction wrought by the recent coup attempt. Beside him stood Lennox, his Klingon ally, scanning the horizon for any remaining pockets of resistance. We did it, Baker said, his voice hoarse from shouting orders. But at what cost? Lennox grunted, wiping blood from a gash above his eye. The price of peace is never cheap, my friend, but it is always worth paying. They made their way through the rubble-strewn streets, helping injured civilians and coordinating with Chancellor Martok's loyalist forces. The air hung heavy with smoke and the acrid stench of disruptor fire. As they worked, Baker couldn't shake the memory of their disastrous visit to Arcadia just days earlier. The thunderous explosion, the screams of panic, the searing heat of the blast, it all came flooding back. "Captain Baker," a voice called out. A young Klingon warrior approached, snapping to attention. "Chancellor Martok requests your presence in the Great Hall immediately." Baker nodded, exchanging a glance with Lennox. They followed the messenger through the war-torn city, passing groups of shell-shocked citizens and grim-faced soldiers. The Great Hall bore the scars of recent battle. Scorch marks marred its ancient stone walls, and the air was thick with the metallic scent of blood. Chancellor Martok stood at the center, his face etched with weariness but his eyes burning with fierce perseverance. "Captain Baker, Lennox," Martok greeted them. "Your actions today have saved my government and preserved the chance for peace, but our work is nowhere near the end." Baker stepped forward. "Chancellor, we've seen firsthand the resistance to peace on both sides. What more can we do?" Martok's eyes narrowed. "We must show our people a new way forward, a path where Klingons and humans fight side by side, not against each other." Lennox nodded, a spark of understanding in his eyes. "A joint peacekeeping force." "Exactly," Martok said, "and I want you two to lead it." In the days that followed, Baker and Lennox threw themselves into the monumental task of creating this unprecedented force. They pored over personnel files, debated training regimens, and navigated the complex web of interspecies politics. On a chilly morning weeks later, Baker stood before the first group of recruits, a mix of humans and Klingons, eyeing each other with equal parts curiosity and suspicion. "Look at the warrior standing next to you," Baker said, his voice carrying across the parade ground. "That is no longer your enemy. That is your brother in arms, your shield, your family." Lennox stepped forward, his imposing presence commanding instant attention. "You will train together, eat together, bleed together, and together we will forge a new future for both our peoples." As the training began in earnest, Baker watched human and Klingon recruits struggle through joint exercises. There were cultural clashes, misunderstandings, even a few fistfights, but slowly, grudgingly, bonds began to form. One evening, as Baker and Lennox observed a group of recruits sharing a meal and swapping war stories, Lennox turned to his human friend. "Do you think it will be enough?" he asked, a rare note of uncertainty in his voice. Baker watched as a burly Klingon warrior roared with laughter at a human's joke, slapping him on the back with enough force to nearly knock him off his seat. "It's a start," Baker replied, a small smile tugging at his lips. "And sometimes that's all you need." Baker stared at the recruitment files spread across his desk, rubbing his tired eyes. The flickering light of his office cast long shadows as he pored over each candidate's record. Lennox entered, his heavy footsteps echoing in the quiet room. "Any progress, my friend?" the Klingon asked, peering over Baker's shoulder. Baker held up a datapad. "Lieutenant Sarah Chen, top of her class at Starfleet Academy, specializing in xenobiology. And here," he said, gesturing to another file, "Kava, son of Mokhtar, expert tactician, decorated in 3 campaigns." Lennox nodded approvingly. "They both show promise, but will they work together?" "That's what we're here to find out," Baker replied, standing up and stretching. "Let's see how our latest batch of recruits is faring." They made their way to the training grounds, a sprawling complex of obstacle courses and combat arenas. Human and Klingon trainees moved through the facilities, some working together smoothly, others still eyeing each other warily. Baker approached a group struggling with a team exercise. "Listen up," he called out. "I want to tell you about the time Lennox and I infiltrated a Romulan base." The trainees gathered around, humans and Klingons alike drawn in by Baker's words. As he recounted their harrowing escape, Linux chimed in with his own perspective, their easy rapport evident. "We succeeded because we trusted each other," Baker concluded. "Your strength lies in unity, not division." Weeks passed, filled with grueling training exercises and team-building activities. Slowly, the recruits began to gel, overcoming their initial mistrust. Then came the call from Krelnar. Baker gathered the peacekeeping force in the main hangar, their faces a mix of anticipation and nervousness. "This is what we've trained for," he announced. "Krelnar is a powder keg, and we're the ones tasked with defusing it. Remember your training, trust your teammates, and we'll get through this together." As their ships entered Krelnar's atmosphere, Baker saw the scars of conflict etched across the planet's surface. Pillars of smoke rose from bombed-out settlements, and weapon fire lit up the horizon. "Alpha Team, secure the northern quadrant," Baker ordered as they touched down. "Beta Team with me. We're heading for the capital." The peacekeepers moved out, their mixed squads of humans and Klingons presenting a united front. They encountered resistance almost immediately, with hardliners from both factions opening fire. "Hold your positions," Linux roared as disruptor blasts sizzled past. "Return fire only if necessary. We're here to establish peace, not wage war." Baker led his team through the war-torn streets, using their shields to deflect incoming fire. They reached a group of civilians huddled in a bombed-out building. "We're here to help," Baker said, offering a ration pack to a frightened child. "Can you tell us where the fighting is worst?" The civilians pointed them toward the city center, where the opposing factions were locked in a fierce battle. Baker's team moved in, using their superior training and coordination to outmaneuver the combatants. "Cease fire immediately!" Linux bellowed, his voice carrying over the din of battle. "By order of Chancellor Martok and the United Earth Federation, this planet is now under the protection of the Joint Peacekeeping Force." The fighting slowly died down as the peacekeepers established control, setting up buffer zones between the warring factions. Days turned into weeks as Baker and Linux worked tirelessly to maintain the fragile peace. One evening, as they patrolled the demilitarized zone, a young peacekeeper approached them. "Captain Baker, Commander Linux," she said, saluting. "We've intercepted some troubling communications. It seems a group of Klingon hardliners is planning something big." Baker and Linux exchanged glances. "What have you found?" Baker asked. The peacekeeper handed over a datapad. "Encrypted transmissions, supply manifests, and a name that keeps coming up. General Krath." Linux's eyes narrowed. "Krath. I should have known he'd resurface." Baker studied the information. "We need to act fast. Gather the team leaders. It's time to take the fight to Krath before he can reignite this war." As they prepared for the assault on Krath's compound, Baker couldn't shake a feeling of unease. The true test of their peacekeeping force was about to begin, and the fate of two civilizations hung in the balance. The harsh winds of Borkus Prime howled outside as Captain Jerry Baker and Linux stood before a group of weary colonists in the newly constructed communal hall. The building's metal walls creaked under the strain of the planet's relentless storms, a constant reminder of the challenges they faced. "We've come far," Baker said, his voice carrying over the din, "but our work is just beginning." Linux stepped forward, his imposing frame casting a shadow across the room. "Today we break ground on the fusion reactor. It will power our colony and prove that humans and Klingons can build a future together." As the colonists filed out, Baker noticed the tension in some of their faces. He turned to Linux, speaking in a low voice. "We need to address the sabotage attempts. The last one nearly breached the atmospheric dome." Before Linux could respond, an alarm blared through the complex. Baker's communicator crackled to life. "Captain, unidentified objects entering orbit." Baker and Linux sprinted to the command center, pushing through the crowded corridors. They burst into the room, greeted by a sea of worried faces gathered around the main view screen. On the display, sleek vessels unlike anything they'd ever seen descended through Borkus Prime's turbulent atmosphere. Their hulls shimmered with an otherworldly energy, effortlessly cutting through the storm. "Raise shields," Baker ordered, but a young technician shook her head. "Our defenses aren't responding, sir. They've been locked out somehow." A booming voice filled the command center, seeming to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. "Humans, Klingons, you trespass on sacred ground. We are the builders, and we have returned to claim what is ours. You have one planetary rotation to evacuate this world or face annihilation." The transmission cut off, leaving a stunned silence in its wake. Baker and Lennox exchanged glances, the weight of the moment heavy on their shoulders. "We can't abandon everything we've built here," Lennox growled, his fists clenched. Baker nodded, his mind racing. "And we won't. But we can't fight them either, not with their level of technology." He turned to address the room. "I need our best linguists and cultural experts. We're going to open a dialogue with the builders." Hours later, Baker and Lennox stood on the windswept surface of Borkus Prime, facing a shimmering energy field. Beyond it, 3 builder representatives waited, their forms indistinct and alien. "We come in peace," Baker said, raising his hands. "We seek to understand your claim to this world and find a solution that benefits us all." The builders' response was transmitted directly into their minds, a cascade of images and emotions. Baker and Lennox saw the rise and fall of a vast civilization, felt the anguish of a people scattered across the stars, and understood the deep connection the builders felt to Borkus Prime. As the vision faded, Baker stepped forward. "We propose a partnership. Allow our colony to remain under your guidance. In exchange, we'll share our resources and help you rebuild." A tense silence followed, broken only by the howling wind. Finally, one of the builders moved, extending what might have been a hand. "We accept. Let us forge a new future together." In the days that followed, the colony transformed. Builder technology meshed with human and Klingon ingenuity, creating marvels that drew the attention of the galaxy. But as Baker watched a joint team tackle a new project, he couldn't shake a feeling of unease. Lennox approached, his expression grim. "We've intercepted communications from the outer colonies. There's talk of armed resistance against our alliance with the builders." Baker sighed, knowing the real challenge was just beginning. "Then we'd better get to work. The future of 3 civilizations depends on what we do next." The ground shook beneath Baker's feet as another explosion rocked the colony. Alarms blared, their shrill wails piercing through the chaos. He sprinted down the corridor, dodging panicked colonists as he made his way to the command center. "Status report," Baker barked as he burst through the doors. A young human technician looked up from her console, her face pale. "Sir, we've detected multiple breaches in sectors 3, 7, and 9. Krath's forces have infiltrated our defenses." Baker's communicator crackled to life. "Baker, it's Lennox. We've got a situation at the power core." "I'm on my way," Baker replied, already moving. He grabbed a phaser rifle from the weapons locker and headed for the power core. The scene that greeted him was one of utter chaos. Klingon rebels exchanged fire with the colony's security forces, disruptor blasts scorching the walls. In the center of it all stood Lennox, his bat'leth singing through the air as he engaged 3 attackers at once. Baker took cover behind a fallen support beam, picking off rebels with precise shots. "Lennox!" he called out. "What's the situation?" Lennox decapitated an attacker with a swift stroke before answering. "They've breached the core containment field. If we don't stabilize it soon, the whole colony will go up in flames." A builder representative materialized beside them, its form shimmering with ethereal energy. "Captain Baker, Commander Lennox," it communicated directly into their minds. "We have grave news. The power core's instability has awakened something ancient and terrible." Images flooded Baker's mind. A massive weapon, capable of destroying entire star systems, buried deep beneath the planet's surface. He saw flashes of its devastating power, worlds reduced to ash in an instant. "We need to shut it down," Baker said, his voice tight with urgency. Lennox nodded grimly. "I'll hold off Krath's forces here. You take a team and find a way to deactivate that weapon." Baker assembled a mixed group of human, Klingon, and builder engineers. They descended into the planet's depths, guided by the builders' knowledge of their ancestors' technology. The tunnels were a maze of twisting corridors and hidden traps. Baker watched in horror as one of his team members triggered a security measure, disintegrating before their eyes. "Stay alert," he warned, his voice echoing in the cavernous space. "This place is rigged to kill." They pressed on, navigating through a gauntlet of deadly obstacles. Laser grids, crushing walls, and poisonous gas clouds tested their reflexes and ingenuity at every turn. Finally, they reached the control chamber. Ancient consoles hummed with power, displays flickering with alien symbols. "Can we shut it down?" Baker asked, scanning the incomprehensible technology. A builder engineer interfaced with the system, its form pulsing with data. "Negative. The fail-safes require a specific genetic key to deactivate. Without it, the weapon will fire in minutes." Baker's heart sank. They had come so far, only to be stopped by an impassable barrier. Suddenly, an elderly builder stepped forward. "I carry within me the genetic legacy of our ancestors," it communicated. "I can interface with the weapon and stop it." "But the power drain," Baker started, realizing the implications. "Will be fatal," the elder finished. "But it is a price I am willing to pay for the future of our peoples." Before Baker could protest, the elder merged with the ancient console. Energy crackled around its form as the superweapon systems began to power down. Baker watched in stunned silence as the countdown on the main display slowed, then stopped entirely. The elder's form grew dimmer, its life force ebbing away. With a final pulse of light, the builder elder vanished, leaving behind only the deactivated weapon and a profound sense of loss. Baker's communicator chirped. "Baker here," he answered, his voice heavy. "We've routed Krath's forces," Linux reported, "but some of the human extremists managed to escape. This isn't over." Baker looked at the silent weapon, a testament to both the destructive potential and the selfless sacrifice he had witnessed. "No," he agreed. "I don't think it ever will be." The acrid stench of burnt circuitry and plasma residue filled the air as Captain Jerry Baker and Linux trudged through the wreckage-strewn streets of Borkus Prime's capital. Security teams swept the area, their weapons at the ready. "Another cache of weapons," a young human officer reported, gesturing to a hidden compartment in a bombed-out building. "Looks like the hardliners are gearing up for something big." Baker nodded grimly. "Double the patrols in this sector. We can't afford another surprise attack." Linux growled, his hand instinctively tightening on his batleth. "These Patak have no honor. We should hunt them down and—" A blinding flash of light cut him off. The ground shook violently, sending debris raining down around them. As the dust settled, a shimmering hologram materialized before them. A builder elder, its form flickering with urgency. "Captain Baker, Commander Linux," the elder's voice echoed in their minds. "We have grave news. The activation of the superweapon has set in motion events beyond our control." The hologram shifted, showing a vast armada of ships unlike anything they'd ever seen. Sleek, organic forms pulsed with otherworldly energy, advancing inexorably towards Borkus Prime. "The architects," the builder elder continued, its mental voice tinged with fear. "Our creators and our greatest mistake." As the elder recounted the horrifying tale of the architect's fall from grace, Baker felt a chill run down his spine. He exchanged a glance with Linux, seeing his own dread mirrored in the Klingon's eyes. "How long do we have?" Baker asked, his voice steady despite the fear gnawing at his gut. "Hours at most," the elder replied. "Their first wave will arrive before the next planetary rotation." Baker's mind raced, assessing their meager defenses against the looming threat. "Linux, sound the general alarm. I want every ship we have in the air and every weapon charged." As Linux barked orders into his communicator, Baker turned back to the builder elder. "Is there anything in your archives that might give us an edge? Any weakness we can exploit?" The elder's form flickered, its voice fading. "We will search, but I fear our knowledge may be woefully outdated. The architect's technology far surpasses our own. May the universe have mercy on us all." As the hologram winked out, Baker and Lennox sprinted towards the command center. The wail of sirens filled the air as colonists rushed to emergency shelters. Inside the bustling command center, Baker surveyed the tactical displays. A sea of red dots representing the architect's fleet dwarfed their own meager forces. "This is suicide," a human officer muttered, his face pale. Lennox smacked his head on the console. "Then we die with honor, for Borkus Prime." The Klingons' cry galvanized the room. Humans, Klingons, and builders alike straightened, a newfound grit hardening their features. Baker nodded, a grim smile on his face. "Prep all ships for immediate launch. We're taking the fight to them." Hours later, Baker stood on the bridge of his flagship, the combined fleet of the Alliance arrayed before him. The view screen showed the first wave of the architect's ships emerging from hyperspace, their alien forms distorting the very fabric of space-time. "All ships, this is Captain Baker," he broadcast to the fleet. "We face an enemy unlike any we've encountered before. The odds are against us, but we fight not just for ourselves, but for the future of the entire galaxy. Show them the strength of our alliance. Engage at will." The fleet surged forward, weapons blazing. The architect's ships responded with devastating efficiency, their energy weapons tearing through shields and hulls with terrifying ease. Baker's ship rocked violently as a nearby cruiser exploded, the shockwave nearly overloading their inertial dampeners. "Evasive maneuvers! Concentrate fire on their lead ship!" The battle raged on, a furious dance of light and destruction. For every architect's ship they managed to disable, dozens of Alliance vessels were obliterated. A massive explosion ripped through Baker's flagship, sending him sprawling to the deck. Smoke filled the bridge as systems failed across the board. "Abandon ship!" Baker yelled, helping injured crew members to the escape pods. "Get to the auxiliary command ship." As the last pod jettisoned, Baker found himself alone on the burning bridge. He stared out at the devastating battle, watching helplessly as the architect's ships methodically tore apart their defenses. Suddenly, a shimmer of light engulfed him. Baker felt the familiar tingle of a transporter beam, and in an instant, he materialized in an unfamiliar ship. A grizzled man with a scarred face stood before him, a disruptor pistol held casually at his side. "Captain Baker," he said, his voice rough, "I'm Zarin, and I believe we have a common enemy to discuss."
You have reached the end of the story. If you enjoyed this story and want to support us, please leave a like and subscribe to our channel, and for every comment that says 88, I will heart every single one of them. Thank you for your time.